Why don't we start with your name?
Dr. Laura Pressley.
And what do you do normally?
My background is I spent 17 years in the semiconductor industry as an engineer and manager of manufacturing semiconductor chips for computers and
Wow.
phones. So I have 4 U.S. patents in device technology, and I've authored peer-reviewed papers on device manufacturing technology. So my background really is kind of computer science, math, and physics. My PhD's in chemistry and physics.
Wow. So you're pretty engaged with the devices we use in our life and everything that happens, and then how it works at the same time, with math being the universal language for these things.
Yes, that's a good way to say it.
Tell us about what happened to you in your election and when it was.
Yeah, so in 2014 I ran for the City Council of Austin, and we had just gone to 10 member districts, separate districts around the city. We'd been an at-large system to begin with, and for about 40 years. So we broke the city up into 10 districts. So I ran in my district. I live in the northeast part of Austin. And, you know, I've lived in Austin almost 27 years, and as president of my neighborhood association, been very active down at City Hall for, 5 or 6 years. With all my technology background. Really, someone needed to be on the city council that had a technical background. Austin's a very high-tech city, a lot of industry here, a lot of growth, and we need someone to be very fiscally conservative and responsible and understand the technology industry here in Austin. So I ran for city council. Our polls were showing I was winning the campaign, really hands down. The Democrats had moved in a 24-year-old candidate into my district 2 weeks before the deadline that anybody could run. So he was not winning the campaign, nothing they could do to get this kid to win. And it was a very negative race. And we knew we won. The polls showed it. Whenever election results came in on election night, he supposedly beaten me 2-1, and I didn't believe it. I knew I won that race. You know how when you just know something? You just know you won. So I got up the next morning, started reading the election code. And, my background is computer technology, and I understand how these computers work, these electronic voting machines. I never have trusted them, but I never thought that there would be such corruption in a local city council race. I figured, it's not going to happen in presidential or congressional races, but not so much a local race. But that was not what happened. There was we found a lot of issues with the election, just from a basic math standpoint. There were more ballots cast than names who had voted in almost every single precinct in my election. And that was the first flag that said something's wrong. Maybe 1 or 2 precincts could be off, but not almost every one. And that is a fingerprint of a computer hack, because there's issues when you try to target a percent of what someone voted and you back calculate the number of voters. It never really matches up. So that was the first flag. So I got up and started reading the election code. What are the backup records that in Texas are required for electronic voting? And what's interesting, God bless the Texas legislature, because they've done a fabulous job at putting Band-Aids around this thing, in the paper backup records. And what we started finding, we did a recount, and the county could not produce what's legally required for a recount in Travis County and in Texas. That was the first really big issue of the illegalities that are going on. So we filed the first lawsuit in the state of Texas, citing that you can't know what the results are when you don't have the backup records to prove what the computer said we voted. And what's interesting, when we did our recount, there were 2 kinds of ballots. There were paper ballots that were the absentee ballots that voters had cast, and those results showed an exact tie, 240 to 240, exactly 50%, 50%. So there was no victor in the paper ballot recount. What the 2-to-1 results came into play with the electronic. Okay, so that was really just not lining up with the paper records. And
and that leaves you with a 66-33, right?
Yes,
with
2-to-1. Yeah. And we know the race. He was not beating me 2-to-1. I had probably 3-to-1 signs, yard signs in the neighborhoods in my district. So just didn't match up. Things didn't match up. So the required legal records. One thing Texas required, there's 3 records that Texas requires for electronic voting. One is what's called a ballot image, an image of the ballot as you cast it on the voting machine. And the county could not produce that. They produced something else that just looks like a data structure with printed out one per page, and that's what they counted. And that was not a legal ballot. So that's part of our lawsuit. We filed an election contest saying Travis County did not produce what's legally required for a recount. The only ballots that they produced were the mail-ins, which were exactly tied. So then there's another record. It's called the results tally tape that election judges print out at the end of the election night when the polls close, and they print these tapes right then and there before the equipment leaves the building, and the judges sign them and they authenticate it. They return them to the county, and the county told the judges don't print the tape. And that tape actually has the result of each polling location and the number of votes each candidate got. Not how a person voted, but the number of votes each candidate received. And it's a backup record before the equipment leaves the building to validate what the computer down at the central count says in the end of what the results are. So those two records are absolutely missing in my race. And the third record, which is what the computer said we voted, in our lawsuit we got audit logs of the actual errors that were occurring on that main computer that was tabulating votes. And guess what? There were corruption errors with those entries on that main computer. So now there's no image, there's no tape to validate what the results are, and the computer tabulation is corrupted. That's a big concern. So what we've said in our lawsuit is the first in the state, and we actually are the first candidate in the country that has ever received these audit logs. And these audit logs are time date stamps of every activity on the computer. And we receive those, and a corruption error from a computer science standpoint doesn't look good. Do you want to see a corruption error on the main computer where my votes are being counted? No, not at all. That's not good. And, you know, we've asked the county how this occurred, why this occurred. They really don't have a good reasoning, and we were denied. We asked the judge in our case, can we please get to the software on that corrupted memory card, and can we take the deposition of the technician that's putting this card in? We had 9 corruption errors on election night, 9 times. Why is he putting this thing in 9 times? We were told by the judge we could not get to the software, we could not take the deposition of the technician putting this stuff in. So that is, you know, you can't prove a case without evidence, and the judge prevented us from getting access to the software.
Now, the results of your race were very similar to the results of another race that happened in the same county.
Well, that's a good question. We had in our election there was a general election, and then myself and my future opponent moved on to a runoff. And we looked in any type of computer hack, you look for mathematical patterns. And we found mathematical patterns, very systematic, repetitive patterns, that the results relative to my opponent in the general election versus the runoff were exactly the same. And so we plotted that and saw, you know, statistical significantly similar results. And that didn't make sense because in a general election there's a lot more voters, and in a runoff you have about 50% attrited out. And why would you keep the same results? But you can't prove a election corruption case with statistics. You have to have evidence. And what we have is they can't produce the legally required ballot image for a recount. They don't have the tape that's required by law. And the computer tabulation was corrupted. We had affidavits from experts, Ph.D. in computer science, who looked at the reports of Hart Intercivic, which were the equipment that we used in our race. And there was an outstanding report done on the Hart software code that was done back in 2007. And it was done by a Rice University professor and a professor at Stanford and a couple other guys. And what they said was this corrupt mobile ballot box was an issue. They had predicted this over 8 years ago, that this corrupt mobile ballot box, which is what the errors we saw on our audit logs, you know, that could damage the credibility of the vote counting process, is what our expert told us. So you know, it's really disappointing when, as voters and as Texans, we were promised these backup records. So why are we not getting them? Why are the counties, there's many counties in the state, I've been all over the state of Texas talking about this, and what we found is this is going on in so many places in Texas, in large counties in our state. And what we have found is the Texas Secretary of State, the Elections Division Director, Keith Ingram, is giving waivers to law across Texas, saying, don't worry, don't print the tapes, it takes too long, don't worry, don't do it. Well, no. We were promised that backup record. And he has said that there's this cast vote record, which is just a data structure printed one per page, is equal to a legal ballot. Well, it's not. The state constitution requires that there's a serial number on all the ballots so that you can track them. And this goes back to the 1800s. Fraud's been going on a long time in Texas. So even paper ballots can have, fraudulent issues. So the state constitution actually has a requirement that you have to trace these ballots. They have to have a serial number. And by, the Secretary of State's not enforcing the laws.
So are we still the same Secretary of State in Texas?
We change every couple of years with whoever's the governor. The governor appoints the Secretary of State. And there's an elections director under that. So there's a bureaucrat who's waiving law across the state, and I can't find anywhere in our state statutes that allow a bureaucrat to waive law.
Interesting.
Or to waive the Constitution. So we have put a lot of pressure around the state on the Secretary of State's office to follow the law to the letter. We're not above the law, nobody is. And so please give the counties correct legal advice. We think the elections directors are giving bad legal advice across the state of Texas, and we're holding them accountable. So that's kind of...
So you were running as a Republican first off?
Well, actually, no. I ran in the municipal races. They
Yeah.
are nonpartisan.
Oh, right.
I'm a conservative.
Okay.
I am a fiscal conservative. There's a lot of waste in our city, and I was trying to address those issues and try to bring some fiscal responsibility and budget accountability. I am currently a Republican precinct chair in my precinct.
Fantastic.
So my background is conservative, and
So this goes to the Secretary of State all at the top, and it appears to be controlling results in Texas. And since the only people they're accountable to are the ones saying it's fine, there's no checks and balances on our election integrity.
That's right. In Texas, the checks and balances have been waived by a bureaucrat, and we're not happy about it. You cannot do that.
Now,
Electronic voting has its own issues. People don't. I've been all over the state. I've been from Midland to East Texas to North Texas to Galveston and anywhere and everywhere in between. And people do not trust electronic voting. They never have, but they didn't know exactly why. So we've shown them why and what the issues are. There were backup records that were promised to us, and now they've been waived.
So we went from a system of using paper ballots to a system of electronic voting machines in the essence of easier, but there's requirements for all these extra records that become too complicated. So at a certain point, this just becomes a really expensive pencil.
Yes, and a pencil that can be easily hacked. I mean, any computer can be hacked. Look at...
That's why I said pencil instead of pen.
It's a
So you can
pencil, yes.
erase it.
So, it's interesting, Target's been hacked, T-Mobile's been hacked, the State Department's been hacked, Hillary's been hacked. These are Windows 2000 software, and it is easy to hack these systems. So this is why the legislature wanted these backup records, and we don't have them now. And so the checks and balances are gone.
How much do you think that this is impacting the elected officials in Texas?
There's no telling how it's impacting them. Without these backup records, there's no security, there's no guarantee that the people that are holding office are the people voted for. There's no guarantee.
So, if this is true, in essence, there's no real way to trust the government that's being built for you, essentially. They're building a government as they choose based on this legislation.
Yes.
So is there any solution besides switching completely to paper ballots again and
Well-
hand counts?
Well, what I've said is we need to follow our laws,
Mm.
and we're not doing that. And when you don't follow the current statutes, corruption can blossom. Can just waltz in, waltz across Texas, can just waltz in. And so that's the first thing. We have to follow the laws that we have on the books, and we're not doing that most basic thing. And then, you have to really look at a bigger picture kind of more strategically. That's a tactical solution. Fix it now, follow the laws. How hard can that be? That was what was intended. But then there's a bigger strategic vision out there. If these computers can be hacked so easily, what do we do? And what I've seen from an engineering standpoint, this is an engineering problem. You've got a large set of data, you have a lot of people, you have to get the right answer out of what the people are intending in their vote, but you cannot let the ballots leave the view of the public. When the ballots leave the view of the public, however they're cast,
Whether it's electronic or just in the box.
or in the box, that's when corruption can happen. When the voters and when the public cannot view the ballots continuously before the results are given out, that's the issue. So how do you do that? It's a big problem. I'm sure there's some sort of technical solution. We just haven't found it yet. Paper ballots, hand counted in front of the public is cumbersome. But you know what? If there's no technical solution that's not going to be easily hacked or can be hacked. I mean, how much fraud's okay? Is a little fraud okay? Oh, it's just a little bit. No, you can't have it. You cannot let the ballots leave the view of the public. And I don't know what that solution looks like, but that's the constraints that we need to be operating off of.
So moving forward, where are you right now in your case?
Yeah, so our case is the first in the state. It's actually the first in the country because we got one round of discovery in our lawsuit, and we got access to records that most people cannot get access to, these audit logs. And we got multiple sets of audit logs. What's interesting is the corrupt memory card that was shown in these audit logs were the corruption issues. We think there was a program on that card that was downloaded, an executable program downloaded onto the main counting computer, and that's where the vote hacking and the flipping occurred. That memory card that was corrupted was very interesting. We got audit logs of kind of a traceability for that card, and that card had been missing for 19 days at the county. It was missing for 10 days before the election. It was missing for 9 days during the early voting of the election. Where was that card for 19 days? Those memory cards carry our votes. And the computer, when it was downloaded, the computer didn't recognize this corrupt card as being from a precinct. It came from somewhere else. And so who had access to this memory card? What's the security procedures at the county? Why was it missing for 19 days? Who had it? Who was potentially programming it? So we think we have very strong evidence. Our case was thrown out of court because of no evidence. And so we are currently in the appeal process. There was a deal on the table when at a hearing with a couple of our lawyers and our opponent's lawyer and the judge, and there was a deal that said we won't pursue sanctions if you will not appeal. We were sanctioned $40,000. Myself was sanctioned $40,000 for a frivolous lawsuit, and my lawyer was sanctioned $50,000 for a frivolous lawsuit. And the deal was they wouldn't pursue those sanctions if we would not appeal. And we said we're going to appeal. This is the most important thing in our country, our elections, and we have to hold these county officers, election officers, and the state officers accountable. So my husband and I had this, our lawsuit right now is $250,000. That's where we are right now in the cost for this lawsuit. And my husband and I had a decision to make. Do we step up and take responsibility? Do we step back and be a victim? And we decided to step up and take personal responsibility. This is the most important thing there is in our country for these elections, because everything is based on that. It's the bedrock of our nation, and it has to be done right.
So there was some word out of Indiana that something had popped up recently. Would you like to share about that?
Yes, I would. There was an email that was sent from, I think, General Counsel of the Elections Division in Indiana. I don't remember the name. But it was sent out this week that there was fractional capability on the electronic voting system, the HART system, the 2006 certified system in Indiana. That's very concerning because, gosh, votes aren't fractions. Votes are integers, whole numbers. And for the HART intercivic system to have that capability of fractional voting is very, very concerning. Because what the theory is that, you know, you have to have software on the main computer that allows you to assign a certain percentage for a candidate. You want to target a percent. In my case, we were targeted at 33%. That's not the real result that we got, but that was what was targeted. And every election is different. Different candidates' values may change, how much they want someone to get or not get. And so that's how you introduce the numbers of what you're targeting is through a memory card. And you put the memory card in that main computer. But the main computer has to have kind of the software capability to do the hack, allow kind of like an open door. And so it looks like it was confirmed in Indiana that this fractional voting capability does exist on the HART system. That was a little concerning.
So, you know, these numbers, 66-33, the 2-to-1 numbers,
Yes.
We had multiple states in the Democratic primary, particularly in the South, come in with those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say 6 states came in with those in a short amount of time. What is the statistical probability that they're going to come in exactly with those numbers? Just a ballpark.
It's not. It's not what you would expect statistically. It looks like an off-the-shelf program.
That we actually know these programs exist.
Yes, it looks like an off-the-shelf program that is targeting these numbers, and so it's, you know, why isn't there, you know, 72%? You know, you always get the 66-33, and it just doesn't make sense.
There's a variation of it where they have a third candidate where they go 64.4, 33, 1.4, and we've seen that too in multiple states.
Yeah.
And so, so you're suggesting that chances are, if we're seeing those numbers, it is very likely that the data has been corrupted somewhere along the route and been affected out from outside parties.
It's just unexpected. It's just an unexpected result. And people intuitively know when there's a problem, and we know there's a problem. We start seeing these same numbers over and over and over, and that's just not what. Elections are random. Human beings don't always vote 66-33. We don't do that.
So how can somebody help you or help this process along in general?
So what we have found is that if the hack is occurring at the main computer, this is a paradigm shift because we think poll watchers should be off at the precincts watching those voter ID issues or whatever. And what I'm going to say, if elections are being hacked, which we know they are, it doesn't matter what an illegal alien or someone without a voter ID even shows up. It doesn't matter because their vote's going to be hacked too. So it's a distraction to worry about voter ID issues. Those are onesie-twosies.
So it's a smoke screen.
It's a smoke screen. So the real root cause is the main computer at the county office where nobody's watching. So this last primary here in Texas, we had about 15 counties. We had poll watchers at the main computers because that's where it's happening. That's where the corrupt cards are being put in. What I'm saying is poll watchers at the precincts are good to have, but a must-to-have is a poll watcher at the main computer and multiple ones, maybe 20 people.
Is that area made accessible then?
In Texas, you are allowed, a poll watcher is allowed to monitor any election activity, so yes. In Texas, we can have poll watchers at the main computer, and we did in about 13 to 15 counties this last primary. Interesting, Dallas County was the most problematic. They would not let our poll watchers in to the main computer. And you wonder why. Why do they not want them watching the audit log? That's a continuous feed printer. You can see the corruption errors one by one if they're popping up. Dallas County would not let poll watchers in to the main computer. They would not let poll watchers monitor the audit logs. When the other counties across the state had no issue with it. They didn't like it because they've never had it happen to them before, that poll watchers show up at 7 o'clock in the morning and say, I'm going to be watching your main computer. What? It's kind of a little unusual. And, but you're allowed to do it. So we had them there, but Dallas wouldn't let it happen.
Now,
Dallas kicked them out.
having the poll watchers in a few of these counties, did you see any different results?
We did. We saw corruption errors, not just in Travis County. We had poll watchers in our county here again. Poll watchers saw corruption errors again. And even the election guy put in the cards and says, oh, we get corruption errors at least twice every election. Really? You do? How interesting. Are you hacking every election?
So we are told to put in electronic voting machines because they're safer and they're more effective. And at the same time, there's this error process that's coming through that nothing is being done about. Regardless of it's being hacked,
That's right.
the attitude towards corruption errors is that it's normal.
It's normal. And actually, it's not normal. Even Hart InterCivic's own manuals, which we got copies in our lawsuit, say to quarantine those cards. Quarantine, you get a corruption error, quarantine that card, and you're supposed to go download the original votes from that machine, stop the presses. You don't just keep putting these things in 9 times on election night, okay? Even the SOP, Standard Operating Procedure, this says this is a problem. So to see corruption errors across the state of Texas at the primary, and then have counties not allow poll watchers to monitor what they're doing when printers are starting to print and they wouldn't let us see it. And actually, here's another commonality of a problem. The Texas Secretary of State's office was called when the poll watchers in Dallas were not allowed to get to the computer or the audit logs. A lawyer in the Secretary of State's office, Ashley Fisher, confirmed with Dallas, yes, they should not be watching that. Can you believe that? When I had 13 other counties allowing them to do it, and it's in the statutes say the poll watcher can monitor any election activity. That's an election activity. So you've got the Secretary of State giving waivers to law, saying you don't need a real ballot image, and now they're kicking poll watchers out of the polling stations. Something's going wrong, that the Texas Secretary of State's Elections Division has lost its way. And they're giving bad legal advice to these counties.
So do you then, if the Secretary of State was not allowing in the one county after the other counties were, do you anticipate more pushback from the other counties if the Secretary of State is willing to support that?
They're not happy. These counties are not happy that laws are not being administered consistently. And that's part of what law is.
So there's a pushback internally from these counties where they want this election integrity. So it doesn't feel like, if there is a group of people that are changing the votes or rigging in this case, they reflect a small minority of the actual people in control, because some people seem to be open to it, to you getting in there.
Absolutely, yeah. You got it. They want transparency. They want fair and honest elections. A lot of these election administrators across Texas, they're humans just like we are, and they want fair elections. And this is not a party issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It's not a Libertarian, Green Party. Everybody. This is the most powerful issue that bridges all of us, is election integrity. We just want the balance of what the majority of our people want, because that's what elections are. The majority gets their wish, and if that doesn't work out, we can vote them out.
Agree or disagree. At least have it count and let people vote.
That's right. Let the will of the people be heard and happen. But now when you have a small group that's controlling the elections and hacking elections, that balance is not there. And people spiritually and intuitively don't like that.
And that's going to lead to more voter disenfranchisement, more people
a lot of
being
people
separated.
don't vote now because electronic vote machines, they don't trust them anyway. Okay? So now we have a reason why they don't intuitively trust them. We've got documents, we have proof, we have evidence now. And this is a big issue because people want honest and fair elections. And we know honest and fair elections are going to happen. We have to follow law. We've got a lot of activities going on around the state with poll watchers at main computers. We're going to be having those in November. And, I think that honest and fair elections are going to happen because now we're watching and we're not abdicating our responsibility to an electronic computer. People are stepping up and we're saying, we want honest and fair elections and we're watching the laws to be followed.
So the real solution here is that people need to get more involved with not just their candidates, but the actual election day processing, and not just the poll watching at the booths, but actually going to
To the county.
wherever they can get into the entire process, because wherever we ignore a step, that's where it's going to get altered.
Yeah, that's where the checks and balances don't exist. If they don't exist, there's no guarantee that the results are right.
So this is going to be a problem that the people themselves have to step up and fix, because
That's right.
that's
Yes,
the only way.
that's right.
So you do see a solution somewhere in this, even though it seems a little hopeless.
Oh, it's not hopeless. There's a lot of power we have as human beings, and we just have to step up and take responsibility for that. We've abdicated. We've kind of gone to sleep. We got to wake up and say no. And each state is different with their laws, and so you have to go look up what backup records are there for your state or required. We know in Texas, and I've trained poll watchers from all across the state, and I'm going to continue to do that.
Wow.
But other states may have different laws, may have different constitutions. So go and do the research of what backup records have to be there. And candidates, I was a candidate, we worry about block walking and phone banking and kissing babies. I never worried about how the votes were counted, but we have to take that as a step now. You can get, as a good candidate, going up against the status quo, you can get to the 1-yard line with a good campaign. What gets you in the end zone is keeping your election from being stolen. You have to take that responsibility. And if you see election issues, as a candidate, you got to ask for a recount. You have to take the next step. You have all those block walkers and volunteers and donors that gave you all this money so that you as a candidate stand up for the right thing, and then you don't do the right thing when you know it was stolen. You got to do that.
So it's almost like candidates who are running, it's not enough to have money for your race, you have to have money to challenge your race as
That's
well.
Right. That's right.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much for your
You're
time.
welcome. Bless you for doing what you're doing.
Oh, we're trying our best. Thank you.